The materials that I have are a full printed version of the book. So these 3 layers that I've just laid out are the last signature of the last section. And I'm going to use a bone folder a lot. It just makes sure that I'm uniform. Line it up top and bottom. And I punch 6 holes for each part of the book. There's nothing creative happening while I'm making a book. Like, I'm not writing a new sentence or working through a thought. I think that a lot of people like to imagine I enjoy it, which is not an incorrect assumption. Some days it's what I look forward to doing. From the back at the bottom, not because there's any particular requirement, but other days I'm also balancing my work as a teacher or doing emails. I always have a way of keeping track about where I am. And it is work. It's not back-breaking labor. It's not difficult work, but I guess like a central distinction to make is that instead of sitting down with a stack of paper and working on it for 8 hours because like my heart sings about it, it's because I said to myself I need to make the copies of the book. And placing on top of that the cloth crash, and then before it gets trimmed, it's got a squared off spine, 90-degree spine, and it's got its cloth crash and its end papers, and a sort of pattern for myself to make sure that I had a whole stack of number 1 signatures, and then number 2 signatures, and number 3 signatures. Page 106 and 109, where there's a sheet that I had to cut out and then just leave a little flap that you can glue, stuck there, that you can glue these. So when the front cover is printed, this is what it's printed on. The dimensions are about 15.5 or 16 inches wide, and there's a whole lot of blank space over here. More about that in a second. But this is the front cover, and this is the back cover. The same situation is going on with the, I guess we'll go with that, with blank space here. This is ultimately going to cut out. That's going to get cut out because you don't want that bulk showing up within the case of the book. So that's what we start with for those. So here is what the front and back covers look like when those zones that have been outlined by the horizontal rules have been cut out. This is essentially going to wrap around the top of the middle, and this is going to wrap around the bottom of the middle, and since there's another part of the middle, this will be doing the same. It's below the middle of the text that says "A Novel by Steve Mitchell." That's a reference point that I've developed as useful, which I can see on the front where the printing is, and in order to mark it for myself, I'm going to use the awl, and I'm just going to imprint the paper at the top and imprint it at the bottom. I'm going to use this jig, which is just a rectangle that fits inside of the dimensions, just inside of the dimensions of the top and bottom of the front. So with this laid in this manner, I can see a uniform stripe of printing from the front here and a uniform stripe of printing from the front here, not too much. And these lines are roughly indicating where printing on the front is. Okay, roughly the texture happening there. And now it's time to put a whole lot of glue on it. This glue is very different from, say, rubber cement. Rubber cement, of course, has an aroma that makes it impossible to use in public. But if you were to use rubber cement, like you lay it down, you can't move it. And this is movable a little bit after you lay it down. Fair chance I could miss a liner right now, so I'm trying not to do that. It's lined up according to what I need it to be on, and so on. I was somebody who would read at coffee shops and write there, and it seemed to be a natural choice to make books there. I guess because if I were working at home, it would really be a quite sterile environment. You know, you could listen to things while you're working on stuff, and that keeps your mind occupied, but really it's only at some point just a distraction, right? Like it's not fully gratifying to listen to something for 8 hours while completing work, while, you know, like no one's interrupting you. Then, you know, the coffee shop is, so there's one on one end and then on the other end, you know, that's opposite. And I have done this before. I've, you know, reported to the coffee shop down the street when it was the Green Bean, you know, like in 2012, for instance, you know, like showed up 10 minutes before they opened on a Saturday and then stayed through 2 shifts of baristas until they closed. Part of it, you know, might be that like, oh, you know, like I'm doing this, but I can look over there and there's someone different, you know, than who was there 5 minutes ago. And no, I'm not going to talk to them, and God, I sure hope they don't talk to me, but there's something conducive to getting the work done about that. Here and here. And in order to just make it possible to very quickly apply this, I put the book board underneath it so I'm not fouling the working surface. And it picks up a little glue, but that's fine. It's all in the wash. Okay, so, all right, this side is okay, and now I'm going to apply it inside of the marks that I've already generated. The thing that I'm going to do is cut material off of these corners so that I can begin folding. I fold the longest edges first, and so here that means folding from the bottom, I think this is the bottom, and then the top. So that's why I usually prefer non-wood surfaces. This is a very flat wood surface, so it's fine. But the bar up front, that I would not do this step on that. Marble surfaces, rock surfaces, those are fine. As long as they've been polished at least. All right, so marking on the back is no white lines there, no white lines there. Okay, so, right, now it's time to begin casing the actual portions of the book. So I have to check, you know, like that's the back, right, that's the front, and back to see, good. Okay, so now the crash has been glued top and bottom, and the end paper has been fully covered. And this is another one of those things that I just sort of eyeball, but you know, you kind of want the same distance on the outside as the top and the bottom. And of course you don't want it just to be the same distance, but you also want it to be uniform. It's to begin thinking about the hinge. Want to mark that in there. And there. So a lot of this is crafting the spine, making sure that, you know, it's not flat, it's not a dome, it's posture. Okay. I took some poetry classes with Thomas Lux as part of my electives at Georgia Tech while continuing to study aerospace engineering. Through those types of classes, which, you know, I was very glad to take, I, you know, got the sense that, like, oh, you know, it's not like this requires, you know, like, it's not like writing poetry or even writing anything literary is beyond me or anybody else, right? Like, the literary is open to a lot of people so long as they go and seek it. Okay. The reason you need that is because what happens, poetry, fiction, you know, you can bring yourself to art. It's not at the top of a mountain. It's not like everything that you do would be a success, but you need to be able to do, which means having that reference, and that reference. I entered school with the idea that, like, well, if I'm going to study math and science, then clearly I'm not going to have the capacity to do anything artful, which is a clear, like, some people still make that distinction. Like, some people still suggest that there's a split brain, that you could be interested in one but not another. And I guess my path to poetry involved getting over that for myself. So Body of Trust is a 3-volume dose-a-dose book, and I shudder in fear that I'm pronouncing this all incorrectly. Like I did for the other two. I did not really know how to make that. The way that I would make a hardcover book with just one volume in it is, I guess, in some ways related to what's happening when I make a copy of Body of Trust, but it's not intuitive. Like, a challenge in making Body of Trust was figuring out a process that would put all of the parts in the right order, that would make sure that the tolerances were where they needed to be, that the spine wasn't baggy. You know, I did not know how to do that reliably for probably like the first 10 books. This book is one that requires, I guess at this point, I've gotten it down to maybe an hour and 30 minutes or an hour and 40 minutes to construct from beginning to end. And it's possible at the very last stage still to foul all of the material and time that went into it by just pressing too hard on the spine. This book is one that it's a hardcover book that doesn't have a dust jacket. The cover images are printed directly onto the paper, which constitutes the casing paper. And that means that you need to make sure that the dimensions of the Davy board that are glued onto the casing paper are the right dimensions, and they're lined up with the images printed. And that is something that I'm still struggling with nailing exactly every time. I think that if one closely examined different copies of the book, then you might find that there's, you know, a little incongruity around where the Davy board is lining up, which I'm trying to address, you know. Maybe the last copy will be perfect.